We want you to join in. Can you just look at your hands, please? You're really good. You're doing that ever so well. That's the best I've seen it done. Brilliant. That's it. It's there. That's the answer to this. It's in your
I probably need to explain myself because that intro is really weird. There's something that keeps on happening. No, it's not the persistent horrors of life and the fact that every day I wake up, in that bed actually specifically, and realize that my life is the same as yesterday and it feels like an endless cycle of mediocrity. It's that people on the left in the UK keep having opinions, which is something of an ironic thing for me to be using as a jumping off point, but whatever, we're doing it. Normally, I can ignore these opinions, as most tend to, because I have better things to do, but there's one cyclical argument and subsequent action that's going to need to come to a head soon, and it's this. What do we actually do in a political atmosphere where not only the right-wing parties regard anything left of centre as heresy to be driven out of public life, but the largest nominally left of centre party does too? Well, the obvious solution is two steps. One is to withhold your political support from those parties that regard you as unwashed barbarians who sacked Rome. I mean, in this case, Rome is the career prospects of inert centrist entities for about half a decade, which I think is a relatively uncontroversial position, so I won't get into that too much. Step two is to form your very own political party, which, I don't know, a new leftist party? It's been done. I mean, we've even done it on this channel before. This is where I need to explain where this video came from, and because as you'll tell from the intro and the warning that I'm about to give you, this video got away from my original idea. The warning? Well, it's that this video, after the intro and sort of my explanation, is going to get very local very quickly. If extremely specific Nottinghamshire politics sounds like your kind of thing, and you want more of it for some reason, then remember to like and subscribe. That out of the way, let's get into like how I got here, how I end up here on this topic, not in this room. I got in through the door that's like there. The UK left are a fun group of people, I suppose, if fun means really, really likes forming new political parties. See, people seem set on electoral politics for various purposes, and while I can and will point to the limited successes of political party that's posing itself as to the left of Labour and intends to supplant it, people do keep going to that well. So if people insist on continuing to do so, I have an obligation, or at least had an obligation given how this video turned out, to try and take that seriously and to try and figure out what success looks like. How do you even do this? Is it even possible to supplant one of the two largest parties in a first-past-the-post democracy? I mean, we know Labour did it in 1922, and I suppose the SNP did do it in Scotland, but we know how Labour turned out, and the SNP are just kind of a lot at the moment. When I was trying to find a hook for this video of what does a left of Labour alternative party's path to success look like, I ended up looking at a few interesting cases that I knew people would throw at me, and just see whether they were what I was looking for or not. So what was I looking for? Mainly a combination of local election success and general election performances that were good at the expense of the Labour Party and a robust commitment to leftist or at least left-leaning politics. Affecting a progressive sheen while allying with liberal parties, which will be a disqualifier against one of these examples, is not the same as what I was looking for. So I began my search and I thought of the city of Liverpool, a place that's so expensive to get to by train from where I live that me and my partner had to replan our day trip for our joint day off, and instead of going to Liverpool, we're going to Sheffield. So thank you, British trains, for that. Liverpool is home to the Liverpool Community Independents. They formed in 2022 after a group of councillors were suspended by the Labour group in Liverpool for voting against their budget. They went on to field 9 candidates in the local elections in 2023 and managed, in a part of the country that is heavily partisanly loyal to the Labour Party, to win 3 seats, including one by a landslide. Now that's impressive, but it's been a year and a single election. It doesn't really qualify them to be a serious case study for the topic I originally had in mind. So I racked my brain for another example I could have used, and I turned to Tower Hamlets. Now, since we now have a significantly American audience, which is good, I welcome our American audience members. Tower Hamlets is a borough of London that's pretty much in the centre of the city, and it's had something of an interesting political history in the past decade. And like so many of the things I looked at for the original video idea, it kind of deserves its own video. As of today, Tower Hamlets Council has a majority administration, and if you looked at an electoral map at the parliamentary level, you'd be forgiven for thinking it ought to be a Labour council, and yeah, at times it has had a Labour council. But Tower Hamlets' first mayor was an independent by the name of Lutfur Rahman. Now, there's a whole story around the guy revolving around whether you think he's not exactly the most clean person in politics, or whether the local Labour Party is furious that one of their fiefdoms dared to vote for someone else and then collaborated with the legal system to use an anti-Catholic law for Islamophobic ends and got him removed from office and barred from holding elected office and standing in elections. Regardless of what you think, a party that was formed in support of him called Aspire, which was kind of a successor party to the Tower Hamlets first party, won a majority on the Tower Hamlets Council in 2022, taking all but 1 seat from the Labour Party, and Lutfur Rahman won the mayoralty in the runoff, defeating Labour incumbent John Biggs. Once again, while there's an impressive and interesting political history here, it's a little complicated, and as far as I can tell, Aspire has not indicated that it intends to run for Parliament, which means that it just kind of doesn't quite meet what I'm looking for. Also, yeah, there's a lot going on. There's also a much more interesting story here than just dicking over the Labour Party, and it takes someone much more in touch with the specific situation, and to be honest, with a bit more range than me to tell that story. So for now, Aspire, as interesting as they are, have to be set aside. Then I suppose we need to turn to the most commonly offered alternative that already exists. The Green Party of England and Wales, and I specify of England and Wales because the Scottish one is separate, and to be honest, if you ask me, a better political party. Anyway, setting that aside, before I get into my various complicated feelings about the Greens, let's just lay out the case that's often made for them. People often say that if you want a socialist, ecologically minded party that has the potential to challenge the 2 big parties, then the Greens are your obvious vehicle for that. It's actually kind of compelling on a surface level. The Greens have been making substantial gains in local governments, which I would suggest is a good platform to then challenge for parliamentary seats. In fact, that's kind of the whole thesis statement of the video, even as it got away from me. They have 766 councillors across local government, and in 2023 local elections, they gained a majority control of the council for the first time. They've even won a parliamentary seat, Brighton Pavilion. There are a few wrinkles. Firstly, people will say, we don't have time. And while I think that's a mentality that sets you up for failure, it is true that the Greens took a long time to win a parliamentary seat. It took them 18 years to go from 2.2% to winning the seat in 2010. So some might say, hey, they already did the time, so, why not just skip that whole bit and just join them? But there's more to it than that. First of all, if you look at where the Greens do a lot of their winning, you do notice a bit of a tension. If you take Brighton and Bristol, 2 cities where they do very well, you'd probably assume that they pitch themselves as the real progressives or some such phrasing to capture voters who might be inclined to vote for Labour typically and the Liberal Democrats. If you take Mid-Suffolk, where they won their first majority council, and various rural seats where they do well, you tend to notice their pitch is a little bit more NIMBY-ish. And I do sympathise a little bit. You do need to win as an electorally minded party. But also, if you're an ecologically minded party, you do need to resolve the tension between the fact that we need to upgrade our infrastructure like railways, and that will involve actually building more of those things, and the potential environmental and ecological impact of that. But NIMBYism, which they play into, isn't ever really about that. It's about house prices. There's also the elephant in the room of how the party behaved from 2015 to 2019, when there was an ecologically minded socialist in charge of the largest left-of-centre party. You would think, if that was the main characteristic of the party, they would have been eager to work with them in some fashion, but instead they cried about membership of the EU and formed an alliance with a party that was in coalition not 4 years before the 2019 election with the Conservative Party. So some might ask, with these tensions and with these alliances and prioritising of membership in the EU over their stated primary goals, are they just cynical opportunists? I don't begrudge people and parties seizing on opportunities. This is war. But people do get to judge you for it. And also, they get to make the point that you joined in a campaign to delegitimize, ultimately, what you say are your own objectives. Which to me, makes you sound pretty stupid. The Greens, though, deserve their own video, and they'll probably get one at some point, so for now, let's leave them alone. I also think it's worth noting that when you ask people what they want, they usually describe something that in the 20th century would have been called a communist party. And we do have those in the UK. We have socialist parties, explicitly left-wing parties. We even have an alliance or series of alliances made between various groups that operate in this space. The last communist MP left office in 1950, which leaves little in the way of applicable lessons in 2023, at least right now. That would have been the video if I'd stuck to the original plan, and you'd all rightfully have gone, yeah, that wasn't one of your best ones, Chief, McChief, Mr. Chief. I don't know, I'm already boiling to death in this room, but you definitely would have said that, and I absolutely would have agreed. Because, look, it would feel like I just put something out to meet my 2 video a month quota, and you all probably would have been like, you don't have to do that, you can take a break. Which would be kind of you to say, given how bad the video would have been if it was just that bit. So I sat with the topic a little bit, and looked at what I had, and I thought about Football Manager 2023. I'm not joking. In the scouting focus system, you can see players who match your specific requirements, then the players who are near misses. So, you know, maybe I said the player needs to be under 27, but there's a 28-year-old who's exactly what I want. Or there's a player who's just not quite as good, but does suit all of the other requirements. So I sat here thinking about it, and then it hit me. Local politics has kind of been flattened by years of cuts, and the truth is that you do wonder how differently a council in England can really be run. And the answer is that it kind of depends on where it is and what the area has at its disposal, but we're not going to a place with many options. So I decided to look at a party that's basically on my doorstep. Not literally, thank God, but there's this kind of interesting thing happening nearby. So I thought, why not take a look at it? And I ended up falling down a bit of a rabbit hole, and it was quite something. So if you don't want to get elbow deep into some Nottinghamshire local politics, this is your last chance. Thank you for making it this far. Like and subscribe on the way out. But for the rest of you, hope you're ready for a trip. I live in a city in England called Nottingham, and while Nottingham Council definitely has some interesting things that a determined YouTuber could look into, just a hint if you want more Nottinghamshire-based shenanigans, I looked up, or, well, north, to Ashfield, which is a district in the gloriously normal county of Nottinghamshire. There's also a constituency of Ashfield, which has slightly different boundaries to the district, but for all intents and purposes, you can just use them synonymously for this. First, I do need to say that the leader of the Ashfield Independents, Jason Zadrozny, we'll be getting to know him quite well, I think, and he's seen here in this picture looking extremely innocent. He's a little bit litigious, and the UK does have very strict libel and slander laws, so I want to be clear, Everything I say about him or the Ashfield Independents, there will be a link in the description, or a Google Doc, depending on how many this ends up being. And you, or Jason Zadrozny's lawyers, will be able to verify that I am speaking about things that are reported on, and that I have formed reasonable opinions based on the reporting. But just in case this does go a little bit wrong and I do get sued, there's a Patreon. So yeah, just in case I get sued, you know, the £1 tier is always the best one to subscribe to, because you get like at least one of the videos early a month, and you still get to tell me what to do. So, you know, I'm just saying, like, if I do get sued, you know, there is a Patreon at least. With that out of the way, I think the best place to start our story is at the end, which does annoy me a little bit because I hate it when films do the whole cut to 2 weeks ago thing, but I think we need to paint the picture now so that you understand what baited me into this. Ashfield Council is currently controlled by a political group called the Ashfield Independents. This means that a party that just runs in this bit of Nottinghamshire controls as many councils as the Green Party. How big is their majority? Well, they control every seat on the council except 3. In fact, at the last election, they even managed to gain more seats because at the last election before that, they controlled all but 5. So clearly people are pretty satisfied with what they're doing, whatever it may be. In fact, they built on that first win because the 2019 election rolled around and Jason Zadrozny, who was looking very innocent earlier, managed to beat the Labour Party into 3rd place. He took 2nd place from them. They're doing pretty good, I'd say. And to be honest, Zadrozny was probably in poll to take the seats from the Tories, even though the Labour Party are the ones riding high in the polls. I'll explain why I think that probably throughout this entire video. You may have noticed, though, that I said was. And while this is wishful thinking given, well, the entire fucking rabbit hole we're about to dive into, but I think Zadrozny being charged with 22 offences, ranging from things I don't really care about, like drug possession, to money laundering and evasion of income tax, probably, you know, means that his chances have gone down slightly. And, you know, yeah, these are pretty serious things for the leader of a council to be charged with. Now, I don't know whether or not he did it or not, because Zadrozny's next court appearance is the day before this video is out, and I record these a little in advance. So, who knows whether he's innocent or guilty? Certainly not me, and I certainly wouldn't say that now if I had an opinion on it. It's also worth noting that some of the alleged fraud specifically relates to Nottinghamshire County Council funds, which I should stress is a different council to Ashfield District Council, which he is also on. So this guy, as of this part of the sort of script, is on 2 different councils, where his party cleaned up in the Ashfield area in both, and is alleged to have misused funds on one of them. So that's our starting point. How weird do you think this is going to get? Who knows? Let's find out. Let's talk a little bit about our setting for this story. Ashfield is kind of a weird place. I don't just mean that in a flippant I live in the city near this place, so rural and semi-urban environments are alien to me. I mean this in it's actually got a somewhat interesting political history for a place in the East Midlands. I'll explain a bit more. There are areas of the country that have a tradition of voting for certain parties. So the north of England generally votes for Labour, south of England generally votes Tory, but there are places that have a tendency to vote for third or regional parties. The Lib Dems, for example, used to have long-term support in the southwest of England and university towns. As you might imagine, support in those places evaporated very quickly upon their contract with the Conservative Party. One place they didn't have a lot of traditional support is the East Midlands, but Ashfield has not just a habit of electing independents, but it used to elect Lib Dems at the council level. In fact, Ashfield has had a Liberal Democrat council leader. Would you like to guess who it was? If you guessed Jason Zadrozny, you would be correct. Now, there's a whole other bit of the story that I simply need to keep to myself for now, but I am itching to tell you, but we're gonna have to hold off on it. One of the funny things I did during my research into who the council leaders on Ashfield District Council were was that it turns out Zadrozny is also a parish councillor. This man is addicted to being an elected official. But more funnily, his predecessor as council leader, Cheryl Butler, said that he should be disqualified on the grounds of non-attendance. Admittedly, this is partially because virtual council meetings apparently don't count and aren't really allowed anymore, which I think is kind of a shitty thing to do. But whatever, it's just funny to see how small time the beef can really get at the local council level. It's important to note that the two major parties in the UK at the moment are having separate issues that are being expressed a little differently. The Tories are cooked. Like, it's over. That shows in how wannabe tech bro and former most popular politician in the country, Rishi Sunak, simply cannot drag his party into the 30s in polling. On the other hand, despite having 20-point leads, Sir Keir Starmer is simply pretty seriously disliked. I mean, the nickname alone, right? But there's pretty consistent polling data to just suggest that people do not like him very much. Not that there are any politicians that the public particularly like, I did a whole video about that, but you'd think if you were polling with such a commanding lead that you might have some warm feelings about you among the electorate. I say this to point out that one of the things that's likely to happen in the next election, probably in 2024, but who knows really, is lower turnout. And lower turnout opens the doors to mavericks and outsiders, which is why, prior to some recent stories, I would have thought Jason Zadrozny was the favourite to oust Lee Anderson. I mean, I still think he might be, and I think you might see why I think he might be in a little bit. My point is that the original emerging of the Ashfield Independents in the 2010s was the Nottinghamshire County Council elections in 2017. Now, at local elections, this wasn't strictly true, but in 2017, that was a time when both major parties got a historically strong result for their parties. I think people will always write it in a way that remembers it as a contest between two historically unpopular leaders, but that wasn't the case when the 2017 election rolled around. Theresa May, for all her robotic faults, led the party at the time to its best results since, like, I would guess 1983 or 1987, one of the two. It's something like that. And at the start of the election, the Tories were polling 50% at some points, just among the general electorate, not just in, like, specific places. Jeremy Corbyn, who for all of his looking like a substitute geography teacher, took Labour from 25% in some polls to 40% in 8 weeks. In the record of polling that we have in the UK, that is unprecedented. So that makes the Ashfield Independents' first general election outing all the more impressive, but we will get there in a little bit. But first, we actually need to go to the beginning, finally, and tell this story properly, or at least as close to properly as I can manage in this boiling room that is slowly killing me, apparently. I scoured far and wide for the first record of an Ashfield Independent, and while there were lots of records of independents in Ashfield, with there being 14 elected to the council in 2003, and in subsequent years there was an independent presence on the council, it appears the first candidate operating under the name Ashfield Independents was a guy called Roy Adkins, who came fourth in the parliamentary seat and managed to keep his deposit with 5.5%. So, good job, Roy, I guess. His party designation is Ashfield Independents, but I can't really find anything specific that indicates that this is in reference to the same group. Like, it might just be that his designation was that, and then this group formed later, and they kind of adopted him in. I think that's what happened. Wikipedia seemed to insist that he was connected to the group that exists now, and I'm kind of happy to take it at its word, because this is so small time, but just bear in mind this may not be the case, strictly speaking. Or at least the group has certainly changed since 2005. The only other Roy Adkins I could find a record of was a gangster who died in 1990, so somehow I don't think these are the same person, unless there's like a Tupac situation going on, but he decided to reveal it in a local council election. So, you know, it would be kind of fun if that was true, but I don't think it is. As I mentioned, Zadrozny, who this story really can't be extricated from, became the leader of Ashfield District Council after the Lib Dems, who he was a member of, made big gains in Ashfield. Which is itself very impressive in an area with no real tradition of voting Lib Dem. There's also something to note. In 2009 at the county council elections, where in Ashfield, independents specifically managed to make large gains. I mentioned this to establish a character in the area. If at the time when there were 3 major nationwide parties, getting above 20% of the vote, for independents to have that kind of cut through in an area tells us that there's something going on, right? It's also worth noting that the BNP, a fascist, scientific racist party, did very well in Ashfield in 2009. I mention this because as time has passed on since the BNP's moment in the European elections in that same year, their views have gradually been absorbed by various political groups, first UKIP, then the Tories, and now by deference to the Tory government's policies, the Labour Party. There's a reason the BNP folded as a party. It wasn't just that they were far-right buffoons who couldn't pay the registration fee, it's that their base finally heard the euphemisms they wanted from successive parts of the political spectrum. That also works at the local level. In all this controversy about them, one of the things that gets elided about the Ashfield Independents is their politics. And one thing Zadrozny is very explicit about is that he supports Brexit. Now, before anyone loses their mind, being Eurosceptic does not mean you are a fascist or a racist. I'm a lot more Eurosceptic than most of my peers, but Brexit and the messages around the 2016 referendum borrowed pretty directly from fascist rhetoric. And so signalling that you supported Brexit, while not an explicit statement of fascism, certainly won't do you harm in an area where the BNP were getting as much as 22% of the vote in certain seats. That's made more odd by the fact that he was a Lib Dem, probably the most explicitly pro-EU party in the UK both before and after the 2016 referendum. In fact, Zadrozny was an exceptionally successful Liberal Democrat candidate for Parliament in a seat where the best Liberal performance was 26%. And third place, he managed to come second with 33.3% of the vote, which was an increase of 19.5%, and came within 200 votes of winning a seat that at the time had voted Labour all but one time. That was a massive overperformance, and so obviously he should have been the candidate in 2015, right? Now, being a Liberal Democrat candidate in 2015 was something of a poisoned chalice. So while the accusations against him, which will come up on the screen as I'm talking about this, are reputationally ruinous, and in the UK would normally spell the end of being able to show your face in public, never mind run for elected office, he managed to avoid the poisoned chalice of being a Lib Dem candidate in 2015. So who is to say? You'll notice that I'm speaking a little bit around what specifically happened, and that's because the case was thrown out due to lack of evidence, and I'm not touching it with a barge pole in that sense, and also because the YouTube algorithm gets mad at you if you say certain words. But he even said he was going to sue Nottinghamshire police over this, claiming that these sort of charges against him were politically motivated, which I haven't been able to find a conclusion to that. So if anyone does know what became of this, please tell me. I would love to dig deeper into this hole. Regardless, Zadrozny did not take being suspended from the Lib Dems lying down, and so Ashfield Independents were born in 2016 and ran in their first elections in this sort of new 2010s form in 2017. They did pretty well, all things considered. They got 5 seats on Nottinghamshire County Council, and then about a month later, in the context of those historically good poll ratings we talked about earlier for both major parties, they got 9.2% with the candidate Gail Turner, who it's worth noting was one of those independents in Ashfield in the 2000s. So that may not sound terribly impressive, but it is. It was the second strongest performance by an independent at the general election, and to do this while both major parties were on an upswing, pretty impressive. You know what? Fair play. It's impressive. I'll concede the point. 2017 was actually a relatively quiet year for them, all things considered, but Zadrozny was still on Ashfield District Council and presumably endorsed the candidate for his independent group, which was Gail Turner, as I said. which, given what he'd been accused of and had yet to be cleared of at this point, which is the point that I'm making, it makes that result a little bit more impressive, because if I'd been endorsed by a party led by the guy who was accused of 24 crimes, including ones which involved underage boys, I would feel very lucky to keep my deposit in that election. He would in 2017 be cleared, as I mentioned, and he did threaten to sue Nottinghamshire police, which again, if anyone knows what came of that, please tell me. Jason, if you're watching, I promise, look, I'm making fun of you right now, but I promise you, if you tell me that you sued the police and won, I will be delighted to talk about that, because that would be super interesting. In 2018, after Lee Anderson, who somehow managed to effortlessly slide from Labour to Tory and become one of the more far-right and insane MPs in Parliament, and one other person did the same, just caused a bunch of chaos on Ashfield Council, Zadrozny got his second stint as council leader. What did he do with this second stint? Well, mostly he did what 80% of the job is of a local council in England. He decided to play up to local residents' racism, in this case against travellers, which led to this picture of him with a resident trying to look tough when talking about one of the most discriminated against groups of people in the UK. You can see that I really wanted to dive into this, and the thing is that local reporting and local press in Britain has just suffered, so information can be frustratingly difficult to find. But we'll be beginning to get into some of the more interesting goings-on after they win their majority on the council in 2019. Now, they got that majority off the back of serious dissatisfaction with both major parties. Come the local elections in 2019, both major parties kind of ate shit to varying degrees. And that opened up opportunities for not just the Greens and Lib Dems, but a lot of local independent groups who did end up in governing coalitions at the council level. But none of these independent local groups stormed the entire council in the way the Ashfield Independents did. They won 30 out of 35 seats. Now, this was helped by the predecessor council being a Labour council, and for those who don't know, Labour councils have a reputation for being kind of terrible. Just terrible. How did the Ashfield Independents celebrate their big 2019 breakthrough? Well, with one of their councillors, a deputy leader, forgetting to pay council tax because they were dead busy during the election period. I mean, for full disclosure, she did pay it in full, but yeah, Helen Ann Smith, tremendous job, well done, great opening move. No notes from me. Not a terribly auspicious start, all told, but if you know anything about the Ashfield Independents now, it should be that they don't let these things get them down. They came back in 2019 and ran Jason Zadrozny himself, acquitted from the legal troubles dogging him, and freshly elected the majority leader of the council, and he beat Labour into third place. Possibly the strongest local independent / party, showing in that election. It's at this point that between being run as a vaguely conservative council by doing things like getting mad at a psychopath and getting more funds for roads, and how do I know they got more funds for roads? Because they have a YouTube channel which has one video with 304 views, and yes, I am one of those views, bragging about £1 million for roads. I'm not even kidding, go check, that is a real YouTube channel, I've not made it up. Between all these things, though, I need to introduce you to a brand new character. A new challenger has appeared. Who is it? It's this guy. Who's this guy? It's the on-again, off-again deputy leader of Ashfield District Council, Tom Hollis. 2020 was another year of just quietly being the most typical local authority in Britain, until Tom Hollis, the deputy leader, got a court summons for harassment. He was one of the councillors who got fined for breaking lockdown rules. Now, the fine was later rescinded, which I found out by checking their Twitter page, who retweeted the news as if it was a great vindication of how innocent their councillors were. They haven't tweeted since 2021. I love their Twitter page. It's such an ancient archive of a very particular moment in British politics. It's great. Just love it. So all of this being funny, and that really is all that there is to a lot of this, he also decided to stack up a trial for bad driving, which led to a statement from the Ashfield Independents insisting they had CCTV to prove that Tom Hollis would be cleared. Now, keep that in mind about there being video proving he would be, he would be proven innocent, because it's going to be relevant, right now, actually. Tom Hollis was found guilty of harassing his neighbours. He called the police on his neighbours, play acting that he was being chased by a knife-wielding person. Now, the reason we know he did this was because it was recorded, which puts the party's statement about CCTV into some definitely questionable territory, because it turns out the evidence did exist and it wasn't the ones that he thought it was. Apparently he was planning to appeal. I have no clue what came of that. So I bet you're wondering what all of this argument was about. Well, it was about a hot tub. More specifically, that Tom Hollis was accused of hosting council meetings in his hot tub. Look, I had a friend growing up. Well, like a friend, but you know one of those people who runs in an adjacent social circle to yours, and you chat to them when you're in class, and you see them at parties. But his family had a hot tub, and I was never invited to the hot tub, which is fine. I wasn't greatly comfortable with my body, even though my body was better than it was now back then. I just looked in the mirror and was intensely disappointed. But now I'm thinking that my friend may have been hosting early town council meetings in it, age 17, although given the character of local government being painted by this, that wouldn't necessarily surprise me. Tom Hollis straight up refused to resign, despite being convicted of harassment, which in most parties would see you lose, any right to be a member. But instead of resigning, he was dismissed, which is a very funny way to say sacked for dangerous driving and harassment. In the meantime, Zadrozny decided to call Lee Anderson, the former Labour councillor who became a Tory MP, and who incidentally was kind of in favour of the Soviet vagrancy law in 2019, and also got caught trying to get his mate to pose as an undecided voter on the doorstep or whatever for press purposes. It was a whole thing. He called him a moron, which isn't language that I'd ever use to describe someone, but I do think it speaks to the quality of the characters involved that this was going on all while the deputy leader was getting done for harassment. In November 2022, things kicked off again, with 6 people being arrested, including what the article calls a number of Ashfield Independent councillors, for just a variety of crimes, including fraud, money laundering, misconduct in public office, and electoral offences. The party, for its part, vigorously denied any wrongdoing, but we've kind of been there before with the Tom Hollis fella, so excuse me if I'm a little skeptical. All 6 of the arrested people were released as the investigation continued, and in case anyone gets confused, this is a different series of arrests than the ones I mentioned all the way at the beginning of this bit, which took place in 2023 after the local council elections, where despite all of this happening, they still gained more seats. In the wake of gaining more seats, you'll never guess what they did. Remember Tom Hollis, the guy who was convicted of harassment, who was the deputy leader? Well, he's back, baby. The only one of them who's actually, to my knowledge, been convicted of anything. And he's not only won his seat again at the council level, he got his big boy job back. A lot of these investigations have yet to end or are actually the subject of ongoing trials, so I kind of have to leave it alone right now. But if you're wondering, yes, Zadrozny and Hollis are just carrying on with their jobs like normal, and you know what? I feel like I can kind of respect that to an extent, mainly because I urgently need to climb up out of this rabbit hole and just, take a breath. So what did we learn? What can we learn from all of this? Well, for one thing, I think we can learn that I urgently needed to get at least one worm out of my brain. Kind of like Baldur's Gate 3, I guess. Don't spoil it in the comments. I haven't got around to it yet. I'm just assuming the brain worm in that game gets removed. The other thing is that local government in the UK is a great platform to do a lot of interesting things, whether that's being found guilty of harassment over a hot tub or supplanting the Labour Party and beating them into third place. Are there any applicable lessons from this saga? I'm not sure. And to be honest, I could have gone so much deeper into this. There's a lot more going on here, but if people are really interested in finding out more, I will do the work. So do, by the way, like and subscribe and tell me you want more of this if you do, just as an aside. But I'm not sure whether there are any applicable lessons, but the appearance of being on people's sides sure seems to matter more than whether you're actually on their side, and that being arrested is no obstacle to success in local government, or maybe even in parliamentary seats. We'll have to see in the next election, I guess, because I assume Zadrozny... I'm not sure if you can run from prison in the UK. I'm pretty sure you can't. But if you can, he would, and he will, and I think he might have a fair shot at it. I also just want to make the point that while I picked on the Ashfield Independents here, because proportionally among their elected officials, a lot of them have had run-ins with the law. This kind of behaviour is all over British local government, right? So don't just assume it's these people alone who are running into the police constantly. Perhaps a local government series of videos is in order. I don't know, to be honest. This whole thing has exhausted and excited me, and to be honest, I'm kind of looking at the bed now. Like, I kind of want to nap. But before I do nap, I just want to say that the worst lesson here: if Donald Trump goes to jail and Americans have the same character as the people of Ashfield, well, he might have a pretty good chance of winning. Alright, enough of this. I'm done. I'm gonna go get a drink and I'm gonna go thank the patrons, okay? We've had enough. So, also before we go thank the patrons, I do want to thank my graphics guy, Emir, for the excellent thumbnail. This was the most challenging one I've given him, and he has done an excellent job. So his details will be all down below in the description. I also need to thank all of my patrons, but especially Drone Riff, Makujo, Kurzeschider, John N. If you would like the videos, at least one of the videos a day early, if you would like to suggest topics to me, join the Discord, vote on the topic of at least one of the videos a month, just generally be able to pester me about all sorts of things, then yeah, the Patreon is for you. Or if you would like to help me in case I get sued by Jason Zadrozny, it's not impossible. So just, bear that in mind when you're making your decisions. Otherwise, I'm gonna leave you to think about this and this new political party that you've almost certainly never heard of, and have a wonderful day, morning, evening, night, whatever it is where you are, and I will catch you on the next one. Take it easy.